Luke 22:39 through the 42nd verse says this. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. Right. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew from them a stone's throw beyond, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." This morning, this afternoon, I want to talk to you about choices. Choices, decisions, crossroads. These are all words that show up in our lives every day. Life presents us with choices, and those choices produce consequences. Right. Some are good, some are bad, but it's reasonable to rest in the idea that the consequences that are produced by our decisions will be ours to live out for the rest of our lives. If you would allow me to be honest, I can tell you there are some things in my life that I wish I could erase. There are some things in my life I wish I could take back, because I am reaping harsh and brash harvest of decisions that I made. And in hindsight, I realized that if I had simply applied Matthew 6:33, then maybe some of those outcomes in my life wouldn't be so embarrassing. Right. What if I actually sought God's counsel first instead of coming to him as an afterthought? Take a moment and consider, where would you be in your life? What would be different if you would simply talk to God first? Why is it that we always buck against the wisdom of God and we treat him like he's a spiritual housekeeper whose only job is to clean up the messes that we make? One thing I've come to realize is that when we make choices, it not only affects us, but it affects the people that are connected to us. Right. That's why we must be an example, because people are watching how we handle ourselves, and some people's very destiny is tied in the decisions that we make. This is where we find Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he is praying earnestly to God, his Father, about his pending death on the cross. Jesus understands that laying down his life means the redemption of all mankind. This will require him to take on the weight of the sins of the world. And that's why this burden is so heavy upon his heart. And this is why he's praying to his Father. Mark 14:33, which is a parallel gospel, as we all know. And it talks about how that when he walked into the garden, he was deeply distressed and he was troubled. But to understand the weight of the burden that was in the Garden of Gethsemane, you must understand why Jesus is there in the first place. What could have happened that would have required Jesus to humble himself even unto death to die on a cross? Jesus wasn't there by accident. Jesus is praying in this garden because of another incident that happened in a garden long before he walked on the earth. Wow. To understand this crossroad that Jesus knelt in the Garden of Gethsemane, you have to understand what happened between a serpent, a husband, and a wife in the first garden that God ever planted. You have to walk all the way back to Genesis and see what happened between the serpent and this husband and wife. Let me catch everybody up. Everybody knows God created heaven and the earth, right? The first 6 days, he created the trees and the birds and the sky. Everything's been done. Everything's been made. He then said, "Let me make man in our image." And he made Adam, scooped up clay out the ground, made Adam, and Adam named all of the things that are on the earth. After that, he said man should not be by themselves. He laid Adam to rest, and he took out of him from Eve, and they were both together. He called it good, and he said, in verse 25 in Genesis says that they were both naked and were not ashamed. Now the serpent, whom we all know to be the enemy, Satan, however you want to call him, the serpent comes along to Eve and he asks, "Tell me about these trees in the garden. What's going on with all this stuff?" And Eve explains to the serpent, "Oh, well, we can eat of all the trees except for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because God said that we will surely die." The serpent says, "Girl, nah." The serpent says, "Nah, that's not true. God doesn't want you to have that tree because he doesn't want you to be like him, knowing all these things that he knows, knowing of good and evil." Why is it that the serpent is working overtime to get Eve to eat from this fruit? Why? Why is it so important that Eve make the decision to eat from this tree that God clearly commanded for her not? Why couldn't he make that decision for himself? So the serpent needed Adam and Eve's disobedience to cause sin to enter into the world. He knew that he had no power to corrupt God's creation. It was not in his power, his purview. It was not for him to do. All he could do was provide the thought, the idea, because he knew that if they were the ones that were disobedient and they allowed sin, then he would have control over that. He doesn't have any power over you. He doesn't have any power over what you can do. You have to give him permission. All the enemy needs is for you to allow him to run your life. You have to make the choice to let the enemy rule over you and corrupt the good work that's inside of you so that you are no earthly good. He wants you to be ineffective. All the serpent did was plant the seed in Eve's head, and that's when she ate. He didn't force it to her. He didn't shove it down her throat. He didn't do anything. All he said to her was, consider this. So Eve eats the fruit. Then she presents it to Adam. Now, Adam, instead of chastising Eve for breaking God's commandment, Adam goes and he eats it then. And that's when everything goes south. Their upright standing with God over. The level of extreme closeness they had in the relationship they had with God is now done. That level, that closeness is over. When Adam heard, and he realized this all from eating the fruit. And when he eats the fruit, his eyes are open. He realizes something is wrong, and he freaks out, and he has to go and cover himself because they hear God moving through the garden now, right? God is moving through the garden. They go and they cover themselves and they hide themselves. God calls to Adam and he asks, Adam, where are you? And Adam says, God, here we are. We realized that we were naked and we had to go and hide ourselves. And God said, wait a minute. Who told you that you were naked? Who made you aware of your nakedness? Have you eaten from the tree that I told you not to eat from? Adam immediately jumps the gun and said, well, that wasn't me. It was that woman that you planted down here with me. And if I had time to really go into this whole little statement about why that was problematic, because while Adam was trying to pass blame to God about who he left with him, God is looking at him and he's saying, but what was it that I commanded you to do? We don't have the luxury to allow carnal influences to influence us when God has given us a spiritual mandate. We have to remember what he charged us with. God charged Adam not to eat of the tree, not Eve. If you notice, it wasn't until Adam ate from the tree that their eyes were open. When God tells you to do something, you have to do what God says no matter what. It doesn't matter what somebody tells you. It doesn't matter what other people are saying. It doesn't matter what people are going on and what other influence might be coming into your life. You have to be strong enough and you have to be smart enough to stand on what God says, even if it means you stand by yourself. But now, because of the choice that was made by Adam and the choice that was made by Adam to disobey what God said, he has corrupted what God has created. Adam was good. He was made in God's image and in his likeness. But because of his decisions and because of his choices, he has now made himself unclean, and everything that is born out of him and Eve will now be unclean. Now you might be saying, well, that's unfair. I don't understand how his bad mistake is going to mess up for all of us. But it's not about being fair. It's nature. Here's why. Consider an apple seed. You take an apple seed and you plant it into the ground, it grows a tree. It is illogical to think that that apple seed will produce oranges, right? It is illogical it's impossible. It does not work that way. You cannot happen. Only a seed can only produce after its own kind. Right. So when God laid Adam down on the ground and he took Eve out of him through the rib, she was good because the seed that produced her was good. Wow. But when you have been allowed yourself to be corrupted, it is impossible now for them to produce any seed that does not have a propensity towards disobedience. Decisions made in the Garden of Eden propel us to where Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, contemplating his death on the cross. Paul says, therefore, as through one man's offense, judgment came to all men, resulting in condemnation. Even so, through one man's righteous act, the free gift came to all men, resulting in justification of life. For as by one man's disobedience, many were made sinners. But as for one man's obedience, many were made righteous. Right. Because of Adam, we have inherited sin, guilt, and the tendency to sin, or the sinful nature. And it took Jesus being obedient to God and even unto death to make us righteous again. But none of this would be possible if Jesus didn't make the right choice in the garden.
Right.
If Jesus didn't make the right choice on that fateful night when he was praying, imagine him in the garden. He's praying to God, and he said, you have to understand Jesus has been on earth for all this time. He is subject to human logic and human psyche and human emotions. He's made connections with these people. He has developed a relationship with these people. He doesn't want to leave them. He loves these people. He's wept with these people and dined and ate and traveled and ministered and taught and groomed and put all of this and poured out to all these people. And he is formed. He doesn't know what to do. And to go a step further, he even realizes that he's going to have to get up on a cross for people that don't even like him.
Right.
He doesn't have to get up on the cross for people that don't care for him. They curse him and they spit at him. They do not like him. His own disciples in this hour of need can't even be faithful. They can't stay awake long enough to let him pray while he's battling with himself. And even though he is warring internally and externally, even though he is fighting with himself emotionally and physically and socially, he's praying till blood is dropping from his veins. He is praying so hard. But can I tell you that he went down on his knees as a Nazarene, but when he got up off his knees, he got up as the Savior of the world and the Son of the Most High God, saying, not my will, but thine will be done. Why? Because he knew that there was a decision to be made. In that choice, he knew that there was a state of creation that was hanging in the balance based on him. And if he didn't go on that cross, no one could get on that cross after him. I hear him saying, because I love you enough, I am going to look past what you're going to do to me tomorrow on this cross. Because I love you enough, I'll take the blame. You can tarnish my name. You can spit at me. You can curse me. You can do all these things. But I will take this beating. I will take this whooping because I know you can't handle it and you're not worthy to handle it. I will do what my Father commands, and I will get you on this cross and die for you because it is my decision to save you at the cost of my own life. That's what I'm going to do because that's what my Father requires out of me. God is calling us to make a choice. For some of us, it's life or death. For some of us, it's simple as getting back on the straight and narrow. No one said it was going to be easy. No one said it was going to be a walk in the park. But if Jesus, the Son of God, had to rely on the strength of the Lord to get up and get on the cross, it is not that far-fetched for us to do the same for problems that don't even amount to that level of stress and that level of pain and strife and heaviness. God will give you the strength, but only if you make the choice to go forward. So where do you stand? Because there are decisions to make. There are choices to be made. Are you going to be like Adam in the garden? Or are you going to be like Jesus when he knelt down in the Garden of Gethsemane? Paul says in Romans, and I'm paraphrasing for time, Paul says in the 6th chapter of Romans that you are a slave or you belong to whoever or whatever you offer yourself up. And if you offer yourself up as a slave of sin, that leads to death. But if you offer yourself up as a slave of obedience, that leads to righteousness. He then goes on to say, but thanks be to God that you were once slaves of sin and have become obedient from your heart, and having been set free from sin, have become slaves of righteousness. So I end my sermon today with the question, slaves of righteousness, what is your decision?
Amen. Amen.